So I just watched the debate between Cenk and Tucker Carlson at Politicon that happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I wanted to talk about their discussion on campaign finance reform. I'll link the video below. It's a fantastic video. I think Tucker's fantastic. Not a big fan of Cenk's, but the discussion at least seems civilized, and more respect to Tucker after watching it because he doesn't seem to just totally toe a Republican Party line, which I also agree with him in many of those things, and he has his own thoughts, as we all should, so I think he came out looking real good. Cenk, not so good, but again, at least it was a civilized discussion. They didn't seem to extremely hate each other, yell, or scream at each other. Now, on the campaign finance reform portion, Cenk also in his debate, for those of you who don't know, Tucker Carlson's a Fox News host, has a program in it. Cenk runs a online media network called the Young Turks. They're very progressive, and oftentimes him and people on his network resort to yelling, having like a moral superiority complex over people and things like that. I'm pleased to say Cenk didn't come off that bad in this. I didn't really think so. And even though I disagree with a lot of his positions, he seemed more reasonable, this time, as Steven Crowder always picks on him for saying so. But sometimes their channel is sometimes insufferable. But again, you can talk to people even you disagree with. I thought this discussion went pretty good. Now, Cenk last year, I think it was last year at Politicon, debated Ben Shapiro, and this idea of campaign finance reform came up. My take is similar to Tucker's take that's like, look, I also want money out of politics largely, but we have to decide what that is. Citizens United basically said that this money is speech, therefore corporations are allowed to give money because that's kind of their free speech. So me giving money to a political candidate or party would be my speech saying I endorse this candidate and I want them to go out and have a voice. The Citizens United said corporations have that right as well. And there's a lot of arguing against why that was a bad decision. I have to admit ignorance on this, and that I didn't look in. When it comes to court cases like that, oftentimes they're misconstrued as to exactly what was going on. I know some of the effects of what Citizens United allowed and how a lot of these corporations have a lot of money into politics and lobbying and things like that, and it ends up very bad because it ends up drowning out the voice of the regular people because whoever's basically buying for the politician gets policies that end up favoring them in return. It seems like that happens more and more often. I think we should start, the best place to start is to having a free press that looks at things with a microscope and says, look, this company gave X amount of dollars to this politician and then they ended up voting in a way that benefited that politician, and we need to leave the public see that so they could vote out people like that, hopefully. But we don't have really a good free press, so clearly that's not happening. But anyways, Cenk's making this argument we can't have the average person can't be heard because these politicians, basically what I just said, they're lobbying and they're getting their voice, which is drowning all of us out. Tucker agrees with that as well. Tucker's concern, though, is where do we draw the line on what we say about campaign finance reform and that we end up silencing everyone who wants to speak about this. Now, if you look at this video, and I'll link the video below, go fast forward to about 50 minutes in where Cenk's kind of ending this conversation, and it takes about 15-20 seconds to get to it, but he ends up talking about how we're all drowned out, and then he mentions, well, granted, Hillary Clinton did get more money from these corporations and stuff than Trump, and she also got more money than all the Democrats, which is why she's able to crush it. But the reason that Trump was able to overcome this was because he was given $5 billion in free press. And there's the rub in what Cenk's saying, right? Because he is now conflating, saying, the press and the coverage of Trump equated to a financial donation, right? So in effect, this is a corporation giving a financial donation. The problem for Cenk then is okay, then wouldn't all of him endorsing Bernie Sanders also be considered his company giving a financial donation to a politician? So is he then really advocating that his channel, every other channel must either and I mean not just mainstream networks, but any channel, right? Why would it be any different? Anyone who has a news organization, whether it be online, them as an individual, or even mainstream media, if what they're doing is financial contributions by talking up a candidate, there seems to only be two possible solutions. One, that no media is allowed to talk about any candidates, which clearly seems like it would be a bad idea. How would anyone know anything about any candidate at that point, right? It would just be word of mouth, but any recorded or imagery spread out to the masses would be considered a contribution. That seems like unfeasible, or second, that you have to devote equal time or equal favor. You can't really take a side. You could just only report the straight news and have equal time to all candidates running, which also seems like it would be impractical to do. Excuse me. So once more, it seems like what a lot of progressive ideology, what Cenk's complaining about and saying needs to be taken out of politics, he's actually saying, except when I do it. This is the same as like with climate change, right? Where it's like you'll see these people flying around on jets telling you, you need to change your life, but I could fly around on jets because I'm more important and I know I'm a good person. Or the same way with immigration. You need to, as a country, leave everyone in, but I'll live in my gated community. Or gun control policy, etc. Why is it that a lot of these like socialist types and progressive types are always prescribing for everyone else things that they think they should have an exception for, right? So Cenk is concerned that, like, let's say a company like Walmart or Amazon or some company like that would be able to give money, right, to a politician, and he thinks that's immoral because it's drowning out voices. Yet he has no problem going all in on Bernie Sanders on his channel and providing that financial incentive or financial contribution to Bernie Sanders by way of his media channel and the free advertising he's giving Bernie. He has no problem giving that to them. So still, what he's saying is he's not saying, yes, it's for all of the people so we could all have an equal voice. He is saying, I don't like the fact that I'm competing with these other corporations that don't follow my agenda, right? So therefore, I want them to be taken out, and they shouldn't be allowed to donate their money. But my media company should still be allowed to run as I see fit. If that's the case, right, then what he's saying by getting this, and again, he's the one, he specifically says, while talking about campaign finance violations, he says that the media donated $5 billion of coverage to Trump, right? And I wouldn't just say this if it was just Cenk giving this idea. This is an idea that seems to be big on a lot of progressives, and for that matter, people on the left and right in all cases that struggle with the difficult proposition of money in politics. But they never seem to like focus. They never focus on the media, right? What kind of situation is that? So it seems to be we want any corporation to not have a voice unless it's these corporations that own media companies. They still can have a voice and they can still influence elections, right? Because at that point, they would be the only businesses that are allowed to influence politics. And what a great influencer they would be, right? And we know, by the way, 90% of the mainstream media is, yes, Democrat establishment, in effect, right? So even though Cenk, I wouldn't consider him necessarily establishment, he's more the progressive wing, right? So he would be fighting that battle, but 90% would still be endorsing the like Hillary Clinton-esque candidate, the establishment Democrat candidate, right? They would be allowed to continue to have their voice, and all other corporations then would not be allowed to have a voice, right? So for me, like, I agree that I want campaign finance reform, and I think there are things that need to be done, and I don't think that as someone who will run for office, I want to take money, big money from corporation. I would prefer, one, to not take money from anyone, but I also know, tragically, we have a system where some amount of money is needed. And so I would prefer to have money in kind of a way for small donations that come from individuals as opposed to these big corporations, because I don't want to be beholden to any corporation. So I understand that, and I'm with Cenk on that, as is Tucker in this debate, right? But the question is, it's very nuanced, right? It's easy to just stand up and say, get money out of politics. But what does that mean, right? Is he willing to be silent himself? Are we just going to allow a 90% controlled mainstream media, right? Are we just going to allow, like, does this affect Google? And it's, if you're willing to give this whole video a watch, I really think you should consider doing it. It's fantastic. They basically two topics, immigration and money in politics, right? And Tucker's fantastic on all of it, I think. Tucker's point on the money in politics, he's like, look, the largest threat to, like, us and, like, our thoughts and free speech actually isn't the government anymore. It's corporations like Google. Google's the strongest company that's ever existed on the face of the earth. It has the power to influence thoughts far greater than anything we've ever seen, right? And so, considering the fact that they have an agenda, right, isn't that the ultimate money in politics per se? Because the danger of money in politics is we don't get adequate representation because our voices are drowned out in elections by these companies that have the ability to pay for what they want in the elections. But a far greater risk of that is Google using their search engine algorithms to control what information people get to see, and thereby they get the people elected that they want anyways, right? We know that that's happening, right? We know that they're censoring conservative voice and even like anti-establishment progressive voices and anti-establishment voices on the left. We know they're doing that. Right. So how far are we willing to go with get money out of politics? I definitely think it's a good conversation, but a lot of these people, like the progressives that argue this, seem to like be willing to say the rules should change for everyone but me. I should still be allowed to give the donations via my media channel that I feel are necessary. So, you know, how far are we willing to go with this legally? What can we do? Right. Don't these media companies have the right to free speech and things like that? So it's a very interesting question. But yeah, it's 2 years. And Ben, by the way, Ben Shapiro correctly calls this out last year at the Politicon debate. He's like, look, Cenk, you have this media company. You keep talking about donations, right? Do you feel like that you then shouldn't cover the elections because you're giving a donation, something of financial worth to the candidates you're endorsing? Of course not. So just another example of a double standard. And yeah, I think we do need to have a serious conversation about trying to limit the effects of money in politics, but we also need to worry about not silencing people's speech. And I agree with Tucker 100%. We need to have the far more dangerous situation is companies like Amazon and Google being able to control the information that's out there. And we see even, right, like one last spiel go on it, right? Like we know that 90% of the media is establishment Democrat, right? Like that's just undebatable. We know that's the case. I'm willing to hear facts to the counter, but I haven't seen anything convincing. All the studies seem to show that. I think it's quite clear. Just look, you got Fox News that's kind of right wing, but they're establishment right wing, and then which I don't have much love for them either. And then you have pretty much name any other mainstream network, whether it be newspapers like the New York Times, Washington Post, or networks like ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, all left wing. All establishment Democrat, right? So, and then we know that all of culture is controlled predominantly by left wing. By that I mean like the entertainment industry, even athletics, things of that nature. We also know that academia is almost all controlled by these left wing ideologies and the Democratic Party. And so the only area that like there seemed to be a reasonable discussion where people could share values or ideas that aren't necessarily in what's in that mainstream ideology was online and places like social media. And now we're starting to see that places like Twitter, YouTube, Google, Facebook that are now censoring those non-establishment ideas as well. So Tucker's absolutely right. That's a bigger threat to the shaping of this country than the general money in politics. But I think there's room to address both of them. And I think that be wary when you hear people that are like, oh, we should get rid of money in politics, but what I do is okay. What I do is okay. Like that's hypocrisy, and we should reject that because it just shows that it's not about having a totally equal system. Because if that system could mean that people that disagree with them have a voice, they wouldn't like it. They only want their voice to have more projection, right? So I think that's what Cenk's arguing for here, whether it be out of ignorance because he doesn't understand the position he's advocating for, or more likely because he's thought it through and he wants that extra power and he wants people he perceives as opponents of them silenced while his voice is magnified. So, all right, thanks everyone. Have a good one. Oh, and if you like my videos, like and subscribe. Thanks.